We published the 2020 annual report for NatureSpot at the beginning of the month. Obviously 2020 was a very strange year. What it didn't do was suppress the number of records we had submitted to NatureSpot. We had nearly 59,000 records submitted, and 97% of those records were verified and accepted, which of course across the whole of Leicestershire and Rutland is a big contribution to our understanding of local wildlife. During the course of the year, we added a total of 570 new species to the NatureSpot species library, which took us to 7,000 by the end of the year, or just over 7,000. I'll have something to say about that later. We had 100 new accounts created, people who submitted records to NatureSpot. And in total, we had over 1.1 million unique visitors to the website last year. So it was our busiest ever year. And hence the website has been under pressure from time to time. If you look at the number of records submitted, you can see we had more records submitted last year than we did in any previous year. So the question is, lockdown, what lockdown? It certainly didn't affect the number of records that were submitted. And this is just the total records, cumulative records over the years, and you can see it's going on. It's now over 300,000 records that have all been verified, that have been submitted to the county, the VC55 database. But one thing that is of interest, I think it's of interest, is if you look at where those records were submitted from. So in the large panel here are the records submitted last year in 2020. And the inset panel, top right, are all the NatureSpot records. And you can see some differences between them. There are areas of the county which appear quite pale. There are areas of the county where we never get very many records submitted. But the southwest seem to go down a little bit. I have lots of graphs, but I won't show them all this evening. But when you plot the density of records, you can see that we had slightly fewer records submitted from Charnwood. And I think that's because the big nature reserves in Charnwood weren't being visited as much. I know some of you were visiting those reserves last year, but not all of them. And significantly fewer for Leicester, for Rutland Water and that area. But the interesting thing to me is what you can pick out on these maps are the road network. You can pick out the A46 and the A47, and you can see in the overall records on the top right. But last year, it's more difficult to see those. So I think there is evidence that people were driving less and probably out in the countryside less, and recording closer to home. So I think lockdown did have an effect, not on the total number of records, but on the distribution of records. So that's the annual report. I don't know if you've got anything else you want to add about the annual report, Dave, at this stage?
Overall, it followed a very similar pattern to previous years. We just have more of it. I always find it interesting to look at the kind of seasonal visitation figures. We have a peak normally in June and July, and then it drops off through the winter months. And this has been a very predictable pattern that's happened every year, and that gives us quite an interesting challenge in the peak months. We have so many visitors that the bandwidth we have on our web hosting package goes through the roof, and so we kind of get forced to kind of to pay more to buy more capacity. And then of course it always, as soon as we've done that, it always falls away again. And so we kind of need to kind of oscillate between a kind of a high traffic website package and a low one. But every year, overall, it's gone up and up. I mean, it's interesting to look also where those visitors come from, because they don't all come from Leicestershire and Rutland, even though, as you know, we're a website that really only covers local wildlife. We have a huge following from all around the country. We get loads and loads of very complimentary emails of people say how useful they find it. And I guess it shows that Leicestershire and Rutland have a fairly kind of typical British wildlife. I mean, we're missing specialists, you know, the species you'd find on the coastal areas and perhaps those in, you know, maybe in mountains and so on. But on average, we have very typical wildlife, and so it's not perhaps surprising on reflection that other people find it useful. What is perhaps more surprising when you look at the visitor figures is there's quite a number of people that look at the website regularly from other countries, and not just kind of over the channel and so on, but you know, from much further afield, you know, from America, for example. And again, this was a surprise to me, was to realize actually how many species are common across the continent. Obviously, you know, not all of them. The further you go, the less overlap there is. But nevertheless, you know, even with America, there's still a fair number of species that we have which are just the same.
Yes, sorry, that's right. Those 1.1 million viewers, or users rather, are not all from Leicestershire and Rutland. We did a survey a few years ago, and somebody from New Zealand responded and said that they use NatureSpot all the time to identify wildlife, and you know, and yet we don't have any kiwis and wallabies and things yet on that. We haven't got any wallabies, sadly, because there aren't any wallabies around anymore. But yeah, so very busy year for NatureSpot. If you want to read the full annual report, there are links from the website where you can read all the details and see all of the graphs. Okay. I thought I would just, since I've got my screen shared to save too much backwards and forwards, I thought I would just show some observations from the last week or so. In January 2020, I bought myself one of these. I didn't really know what coronavirus was going to do at the time, but I bought myself one of these leaf blowers. I'm always amused now driving around the countryside, seeing people using these wrong. They use them to blow things out of the way, which is completely the wrong way to use them, because obviously the way you do use them is you use them to suck things up. And if you're interested in collecting insects, you can see on the top left there, if you put a nylon bag and duct tape it over the end, you can collect things in your strainer bag. And you can go to an entomological supply house and pay 15 or 20 quid for one of those. But I actually recommend the nylon jam strainer bags that cost £3.95, and they even withstand brambles, and they're very good. And this is, I've been using this constantly throughout 2020, and it's very good, except for one thing. As you will see, it's got a 36-volt battery in it with a fair old capacitance. And in very wet conditions, that does make me very nervous, because it does have the potential to give you quite a good shock. And of course, the problem is, it's been so wet in the last couple of weeks that I've been limited in my ability to use this. So I'm afraid it's been back to the old-fashioned collecting bagfuls of leaves and putting them through a sieve into a white tray. Good old-fashioned entomology. But when you do that, even though everything you collect is brown and you think, well, there's nothing out there and it's all covered in snow, it's amazing what you can find when you look. So these are some bugs that I took recently from a local site. These are mostly fairly small. They're all under 5 millimeters. Most of them are 3 to 4 millimeters long, something like that. But when you magnify these, if you get your hand lens on these, or if you've got a macro lens on your camera, I think they're really very, very attractive. And they're all adults, and they're all overwintering, and they're all just waiting for spring to start up. So in the at the top left, we've got a little cicadelid leafhopper. In the center at the top, we've got the common flower bug, Athocorus nemoralis. And then top right, we've got, I think, the brownest insect I can think of, Drymus bruneus. And of course, if you want to hide in the leaf litter, that's pretty good cryptic coloration. They're quite difficult to find. And then bottom left, we've got a myrid bug, quite brightly colored. And then bottom right, another one of the ligid ground bugs. But when you look at that on a magnified view, that's really quite a spectacular insect. That I would argue that is as attractive as any butterfly. I think these are really, really, really nice insects. And I know some of my NatureSpot colleagues do as well. Of course, there are spiders, and I don't want to preempt my talk from next week, but what I would say is the leaf litter is alive with spiders. I don't want to frighten anyone here. If there's anyone who doesn't like spiders, the largest of these is 5 millimeters long, and some of them are only a couple of millimeters long. So they are not as big, like it says on the door mirror of your car. You know, objects in the mirror might appear larger than they do, or it's the other way around, isn't it? You know, but you know what I mean. The point is, it looks dead out there. It looks like there is nothing alive, you know, and yet under the leaf litter, the ground is just alive with these things. Doesn't matter how wet it is, how cold it is. The life is out there, and it's happily carrying on without us. A few hours after I collected these last week, they were all covered by a blanket of snow. And so they've all been hunkered down since the snow started, but they're still there. They've probably snowed down a bit as the temperature dropped, but they're all quite happily running around. So there's marvelous stuff to be found in the leaf litter within walking distance of your house. So that is my section. That's what I wanted to say. Yeah, I'm sorry the labels are a bit small on the slides. I mean, if anybody wants to ask any more details, I can. But they're bugs and spiders. You know, there's loads of stuff out there. And of course, you know, we're always happy to help identify things via the discussion forums on NatureSpot if you want it. So, Dave, I think you've got some slides. Can I hand over to you?
Sure. Yeah. I'll just do some screen sharing. My focus at this time of year has been to actually look at kind of a couple of taxon groups that I've previously ignored. Thought, oh, well, who's interested in lichens and mosses? They're small, there's so many of them, you know, how do you know what they are? But a few years ago, I was encouraged to have a look at them, and it's like any group, you know, the more you know, the more interesting they become. And you realize actually, you know, a bit like some of these small invertebrates, that they're actually really quite beautiful if you look at them closely. So kind of armed with a hand lens, you can see some types of wildlife that are really at their best at this time of year. Both lichens and mosses being kind of, well, bottom mosses being the lower plants, they rely very much on moisture in order to thrive and to produce and spread their spores. So a lot of them are actually producing their spores at this time, and it makes them a lot easier to identify. So I thought I'd just show you some of the really common ones that anybody can go out and find. I'm going to start with species that literally, probably you've got them in your garden. These are all mosses that you can find on walls, and this is probably one of the commonest small plants around, the wall screw moss Tortula muralis. It,
Dave,
uh,
Dave, I'm
yeah,
sorry to interrupt. Do you want to go full screen so your slides are a bit bigger?
um, yeah, sorry.
Thanks.
Um, so that if you go out and look on a wall, um, whether it's a brick wall or a stone wall, you're almost guaranteed to see this, and probably in great numbers. And it's very easy to identify because the sporophytes, these fruiting bodies that it produces, are just completely vertical, just like flagpoles. They go straight up. And if you then, through a hand lens, if you look at the leaves, they've got leaves that look like tongues, but with a white hair point at the end. They're quite, the two features together are quite characterful. So that's one that anybody should be able to record. You don't need to key it out. A half decent photo would be enough to provide evidence that that's what you've seen. And another one, which is almost equally common, is the grey cushion moss, Grimmia pulvinata, which again is found on the tops of walls and on concrete. It's very common. And when it's dry, it just looks like a hairy blob because of the leaves, again, a bit like the other one, having this tip that ends in a white hair point. Oddly, with this moss, when it produces the sporophytes, the seta are the stems, if you like, with the capsules on the end, and the capsules are full of spores. And you think what a moss wants to do is to get those spore containing capsules as high as possible, such that when the wind and the breeze goes by, it will help to spread them far and wide. So why on earth this moss actually bends over those sporophytes and it tucks them back into the body of the leaves seems a bit perverse to me, but it must work because it's very common. And so that's another one that you're kind of guaranteed to see. So sticking with the wall theme, I just thought I'd look at the really common mosses that you can find on walls. You're probably familiar with some of the bristle mosses. If you go and look on pretty much any tree, you'll see these little mosses all over the trunk and the branches. 99% of them are the wood bristle moss, but there are quite a few others in the family. And this one is a bit odd in that it doesn't live on trees. It likes walls and concrete. Maybe that's why it's called, the anomalous bristle moss. And it's easy to tell from all of the others because when it produces its capsules, they're held high above the leaves, as you can see there. So it has these hairy capsules suspended free of the leaves. And again, that's fairly easy to see. If you didn't have the capsules, it would be hard to know what you're looking at. There is actually one other bristle moss, which you may find on concrete. It's nowhere near as common, but this is the only one that has white hairs on the end of its leaves. As you would guess from its name, the white-tipped bristle moss. But you can see here the capsules don't stand proud of the leaves. They're kind of tucked in a little bit like a typical bristle moss. So those are two that you should find if you look for them. Now this is one that doesn't grow on the tops of walls particularly, but is very common, and I think it's one of the most beautiful mosses around, the silky wall feather moss. It's very abundant where I live in Ratby. It's on all the granite walls around the church and many garden walls too. And it has this beautiful kind of bright lime green mixed with this kind of gingery brown. And it has these kind of like feathery, silky, as the name suggests, kind of tendrils that push out. It's a really attractive moss. And so that's another good one to look out for. This isn't one that you'd find on walls, but I'll just throw it in because whilst we're talking of common mosses, this is maybe the commonest of them all. And you've probably got it in your lawn if you've got a lawn. At this time of year, you see it everywhere, and it's very easy to identify because looks a bit like a bottle brush, really. The stems have all of these leaves that reflex back off the stem and gives it this kind of like curly, springy look. So if you've not recorded mosses before, I think this might be a good time to start, and you can no doubt tick off those species I've just been through within the first 5 minutes of your search. And the same is true of lichens, actually. There are some really common lichens that are pretty easy to identify. So again, I'm looking at lichens that you're going to run into on virtually every walk that you go on. So if you look for a smooth bark tree, such as a young ash tree, you'll see, in fact, from a distance, you can see these kind of little patches of a pale lichen on the bark. And sometimes there's so many of them that they form these mosaics where they all interconnect. And there are 3 really common ones. In fact, you find all 3 of them on most trees. So there's this one, which has got a kind of a greeny thallus, that's the fungal part. And the apothecia, which are the fruiting bodies, the little kind of black gemmed hearts that you can see, contrast, very noticeably with the paler background. So this kind of green and black tells you that it's this species on a smooth bark tree. And alongside it, you will see in equally large numbers this one, Lecanora claritella, which is got a white thallus with these kind of orange tarts on it, the orange apothecia, or beige rather. Just one little thing to bear in mind is that lichens do change color both as they grow and also depending on how damp they are. You may have noticed that with the bright yellow lichens, Xanthoria parietina, which grows wherever there's kind of high nutrients. In the dry, it's bright yellow, but when it's very wet, it goes very greenish, and you think, it'd be easy to think it's a different species. And with this one, when it's younger, the apothecia, the fruiting bodies are kind of a greener color, and you can actually see that on the top of this slide here. Some of the mature ones are beige orange, and the younger ones are green. And immediately below it, you have the 3rd really common lichen, which is very different. It has almost an indistinguishable, very pale thallus. The fungal plate, if you like, that the fruiting bodies are on. But it has these very weird, squiggly, star-shaped black fruiting bodies on it. Very noticeable when you look closely. Again, you just get a hand lens and go and have a good look at close up at tree bark, and you'll see all of these lichens that I've mentioned. So just a quick look at some of the foliose lichens that you would see more on branches rather than on the trunk, although you do get them on the trunk at times. This is the commonest one. It's one of the very few lichens that have a common name, the hammered shield lichen, Parmelia sulcata. And it gets its name because if you look closely at these lobes, it has these kind of white creases in it. It just looks like somebody's been this piece of metal that somebody's beaten with a hammer. So that's fairly conspicuous and relatively easy to identify. And another one that looks very much like it, but if you look closely, it's absolutely covered in these white dots. And this is Punctelia subreducta. I always think that it'd be much easier if somebody gave them common names. This would be a good one. I'm not quite sure what you'd call it, spotty dick or something. But it's very common. You find it on most trees. If you probably have to look a little closely to spot it, but those white spots are very characteristic. And this is one of my kind of favorite lichens. It's this very beautiful pale green. And I always think it looks like it's molten wax. It's all kind of wrinkled and creased, and it kind of sits very tightly onto the tree. So yeah, if you look at the close-up on the right there, you can see all those wrinkles. So combined with the color and those wrinkles, again, it's a nice, easy one to identify. Flavor Parmelia caparata. And I'll just show you this one because this is the other that you find. This time there's kind of 4 very common lichens that all have this similar kind of foliage structure with all these overlapping lobes. Palmatrina perlatum. This one does change colour a little bit, but when it's wet, it goes a bit greener. But when it's dry, it has this pearly white look, which is quite different to all of the others, and doesn't have any of the kind of marks, doesn't have any spots or wrinkles or hammer marks on the lobes. It's very kind of clean cut, but the colour normally gives this one away. So if you want to have a look at lichens, I'll just point you to the lichen ID resources page on NatureSpot. And if you go into on the top menu on the kind of recording and identification menu, there's a submenu called ID resources, which gives you a list of all the main taxon groups and a page for each of them, where we point to keys, books, websites that are useful if you want to kind of get into that group. But one of the resources I wanted to point to is about a year ago, I produced this little beginner's guide to recording lichens. And it covers most of the species I just mentioned. So you could just kind of get a copy of that. You've got a reminder of all of these common lichens. And you should, I think there's 10 on the list. And anybody that's into wildlife and recording should be able to get all of those 10. In terms of mosses, there is a really brilliant book that came out a few years ago. It's not cheap, but it's got lovely colour pictures and species accounts in it. But the amazing thing is, if you go onto the British Biological Society website, the BBS are the kind of publishers of this book, the whole book is available free online. It's not laid out quite as the book is, but it has the key in it, and it's an excellent key and links to all of the species. So if you don't want to buy it, you can certainly go and have a little play with the key that's in there. Interestingly, they are selling copies for £30, but I noticed the other day they're selling seconds for £20. I think they're brand new books. They've just got a little bit of staining on a few of the pages, so possibly a chance to get a bit of a bargain. And I just finish off with a more unusual lichen, which I found the other day on a walk at Warren Hills. This very strange thing on the rocks there. It looks almost like an algae or something odd that's kind of cascading down. It certainly doesn't look like a lichen, but that's what it is. It's a lichen called rock tripe, Phasalia pustulata. And if you look at it more closely, very strange looking thing. I looked it up online and I wondered why it was called rock tripe. I suppose maybe the texture of it with all those little bubbles and things makes it does look a little bit like tripe. But it might be because in desperate times people eat it. It says on in answer to the question, can you eat it? It said yes if you're desperate. I don't think it tastes of very much, and I don't think it offers much nutrition either. But it's an interesting thing to come across. And I'd say all of these mosses and lichens are at their best at the moment, so a good time to go out and look for them.
That's great. Thanks, Dave. I don't know if anyone's got any questions they want to dive in with on those two. No, if not, in that case, if anyone else has got anything to share, anyone else found anything interesting recently? Hazel, I think you had something you wanted to show, didn't you?
Yeah, okay. Can I share my screen?
Yes, please.
Minute. Right. What I'm curious about is went for a walk on the 24th of January, and in Burley Woods, which is within walking distance of here. And there were brand new honeysuckle leaves, which have got these leaf mines in them. And I tried to identify the leaf mines, and I've come up with a possibility. I've looked at pictures, and I've looked at keys, and I've looked on NatureSpot, but everything says that you get them in May, and I've got this in January, and I'm just wondering if it's something different, or whether it's global warming has brought the bugs from May to January. I just was intrigued if anybody's got any comments. I mean, I'd obviously like to know exactly what it is. I've worked out that I think it's Diptera, and that it's this group. And I think Graham Kalo has got one of these on NatureSpot. I mean, there's several. Let me show you some of the next pictures. There was a whole tree which had it all over it, and I brought a few leaves home to see if I could get some more up close pictures of the mines. And obviously, I think that's the little creature still inside, which I think you can just
Hazel,
sort of see it down here.
I know exactly what it is because I found one the other day.
Oh, lovely. That's what I was hoping.
And I sent it to Barry Worthington just to check, because like you, I was a bit puzzled by what it was. And it's none of the ones that you've listed.
No.
I can't remember the name. It begins with C, but the specific name is Aprolina. It's the one that you see very commonly on honeysuckle in the summer, and it has like a star-shaped mine in the center of the leaf around the mid-rib.
Yeah.
But what Barry told me was that clearly the flies are still active in the winter. He said in winter, and I don't know why they do this, but he said the mines don't follow the midrib; they go to the edges of the leaf.
That's amazing.
So yeah, if you look, it's something that Aprolina chondra, something or other, Aprolina, but
is it on NatureSpot?
It is on NatureSpot, yeah. And I posted my picture a few days ago. I made a note that this in the comment under the picture that this is the typical winter mine formation around the edges of the leaf rather than in the center. The one that you find in the center in the summer is very conspicuous. It looks like an asterisk, really.
Yeah.
It's that species.
And it's the one that look. Oh right. Yeah.
The winter form of it.
Is that it for you for slides, Hazel?
Yes.
If you want to just stop sharing a minute, I can show you.
Yeah.
Sue's just flagged up. It's a Chromatomya Aprolina.
Chromatomya. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I'm totally and utterly brand new to leaf mines, so right, I've stopped sharing.
It's all right, you stopped.
Yeah.
Leaf mines
there
are
we
quite
go.
tricky, Hazel. And
they're what? Sorry.
Leaf mines are quite tricky because I have noticed a few other anomalous ones at this time of year. I'd have been quite nervous to have identified that from your picture, so I think it's always worth contacting Barry Warrington, who's the sort of national recorder. He's the most helpful person you can imagine, and he will help you out. Yeah, actually, Graham Kalo's photos look very good there, don't they? But there are a number of other mines on honeysuckle, so you do need to be careful.
Yes.
There's and yes, they're all Diptera, but there's at least 4 or 5 other sorts, which they all look superficially very similar, and I have never been able to sort them out with a huge amount of confidence myself. So Barry's your guy, I think.
That's what I was thinking. It was just the fact that it's January. I thought, well, that's nothing seems to be saying that it's around in January. Can you just run that down so I can get the name again? Chromatomya. Yeah.
I think really honeysuckle shouldn't be in leaf at the moment, should it? I think this is part of the issue. It's
some of them start coming in the autumn, don't they? In sort of December, Yeah. Oh, that's great. Thanks. And so, just as I say, I'm totally new to this. Barry Worthington.
Barry Worthington, yeah.
Who exactly is he, and what sort of
Sorry,
organisation?
Barry Warrington. Sorry.
Warrington.
He's the national recorder for the Agromyzidae recording scheme.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
If you can't find it, Hazel, just drop me an email and I'll send you his email address.
Yeah, that's okay. That's lovely. Thanks.
Yeah, as Sue says, it's really helpful. You send him any pictures and he'll get back to you very quickly. And you know, in fact, that picture there on the bottom left is the one that I added the other day, and that's the one. Yeah, that's the one I sent to him.
Yeah.
About 4 or 5 days ago, and that's what he told me exactly what it was.
That's very similar to mine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, lovely. Thank you very much.
In Martin Shoal Woods, you will see leaves on honeysuckles all year round. I think it's because it's so sheltered. So where David saw it, that there are leaves on honeysuckles throughout the year in the winter.
Can I just point out the impact of the Leicestershire Leaf Miner Club here on the map, and clearly there's another guy over here who likes recording leaf mines as well.
Hugely under-recorded, particularly Diptera. I think there's a lot of people recording moth leaf mines.
So there's a lot of them.
Yeah,
we can,
you will find species that no one has found before in BC 55 if you start. I think we probably have only scratched the surface of what is out there. And you do find them all year. Another one you can find at the moment is, slow down, Alan, go back up. There's one on primrose, is called Chromatomyia primuli. Oh, stop. So towards the bottom left of the screen there. And if you've got the leaves, the last year's leaves still showing on your primroses in your garden, you probably will find that one. It's incredibly common. And again, the leaves will still be around now. They just look a bit manky at this time of year, but you should still find them. We ought to do something on garden leaf mines, actually, Alan. I think it might be quite useful. There's so many you can find in your garden of these.
One more tip, Hazel.
Yeah.
Do you have a scanner? Do you have a flatbed scanner?
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant for leaf mines. Just put your leaf directly on the flatbed scanner and scan it, and you get really high resolution, really high quality imaging.
Oh, right.
And because the light shines through them, to an extent, you can see all the internal details. You can see the frass and any larvae that are, if there are any larvae present. So it's really easy to do as well. You just scan a leaf. So very, very useful.
I'll give that a try. Thank you.
Yeah, great, good. Well, we did that one. That was good. Excellent. I was a bit worried because Graham wasn't here, whether we'd be able to get that one, but we got that one. Is there anybody else who would like to share anything this evening? Anybody else?
Yes, okay. Yes, please.
Yeah. Who? I don't know who said that first. Is that
Margaret? Yeah.
Should we go to Margaret first, Jeffrey, and then you? Hey, Margaret, you've got something to show us?
Hopefully. I found quite a bit of this on a quite old.
Just seeing your file directory at the moment. If you can open the actual file that you want to, I think you'll have to stop sharing and start again when the file is open.
Okay. Is that up now?
Yeah. Now we can see it.
Okay. I found a number of these, and they were very small on a quite old fallen silver birch tree, and I wondered first of all if they were fungi or if in fact it was a lichen. When I get to a couple of pictures a bit further on showing the underside, it almost looked like a rooting filament, a rhiziana. So I actually wondered if it might be dog lichen, Peltigia carinea.
I don't think so. It's not a lichen. It's definitely a fungus.
Yeah. So I'm a bit stumped on this one. So if anybody has got any ideas either now or post meeting, please do get in touch.
When I first saw that, I was thinking it might be Phlebia, the fungus Phlebia, but I'm not sure. It doesn't look. I don't think it is actually. But
Yeah.
that Phlebia is called the wrinkled crust, and it does have this similar undulations in it.
Well, each of the little groups were no more than I'm not very good at centimeters, less than an inch in height, and maybe a couple of inches in width, and much obviously there's a different trees, needles or whatever all over them. I half wondered if they'd gone a bit green because of the amount of wet and water there was, but then the tops were a little bit more white. So I was completely and utterly stumped, but also equally stunned about what I could see. Okay, thank you for that, everybody.
Not sure about that one, unfortunately, but if you submit it as unknown as a record as unknown fungus, we'll get Ben to take a look at it, and Ben will run it past the county experts. Doesn't ring any bells with you, does it, Jeffrey?
No.
No. Okay. You've got something to show us as well?
Hello. Yes, I haven't actually been out at all. I've been sitting indoors writing things up, trying to get through the backlog of things that I've started but haven't finished. So I've been working on an update to the rare plant register. I finished the analysis of the records in the BSBS database from 1980 to 2020. I hope to get that out this year. I've been working on a charophyte flora of Leicestershire. I've got all the records now that have ever been made of charophytes, so I hope to get that finished this year. And I've also been working on the Leicestershire Fungi Study Group's Millennium Project, which I've almost finished writing up, and I'm going to call it Better Late Than Never. It's actually a very interesting project, but it just remained in a box for years. Anyway, so what I have been doing, I've actually finished something. I've written an article for the Lit and Fill magazine. Now, I know a lot of people here don't belong to the magazine, but I think it's a very interesting thing that I've written about. So I'd like to show a bit of it here. Obviously, I won't go into the detail that I've been into in the article. So if you could let me share my screen, I'll show you what it's about. Right, can you see that?
Yes, we can see that.
Now, I've had this hanging about for about 8 years and I've never done anything with it. It's a specimen from the lichen collection, which is held at the Leicestershire Museum's Collections Resources Centre at Barrow-on-Soar. And I was riddling through some of the drawers one day, as you do, and I discovered this specimen in the Arctic section. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, what on earth has this got to do with Leicestershire? Well, if you look at the very top, you'll see it came from the herbarium of Frederick Souter, who was a very important Leicestershire botanist, mostly worked on what were called cryptogams at that point in time, that's fungi, mosses and bryophytes, and he had his own herbarium. When he died, this was donated to the museum by his widow. Now, this specimen is fascinating. As you can see, it comes from the Jackson and Harmsworth Polar Exhibition. This took place in 1894-7, and it was an exhibition that was financed by Alfred Harmsworth, who was the first Lord Rothermere, and it went to Franz Joseph Archipelago. Now, you may not be familiar with that, but it's actually in the very far north of the planet. It's actually further north than Spitsbergen. They thought it might be a whole landmass, but when they got there, they discovered it was actually an archipelago of islands. And this specimen was found at Cape Flora by Harry Fisher, who was a botanist and a zoologist, and was also the curator of the Museum of University College at Nottingham. So it's got a fairly local connection. So why is this specimen interesting? Well, first of all, it's a very ancient specimen of a lichen from the Arctic, and there aren't many of those about. In 1931, a Norwegian lichenologist called Lange wrote an article about lichens of this archipelago, and he referred to this original work, which Fisher wrote up. And he said in the article that none of the specimens in the exhibition could be found anywhere. So the first question that comes to mind is this the sole surviving specimen from that expedition? And the second question that comes to mind is, where did Souter get it from? Because there may actually be more, but this may be the last one left. So I think this is a fascinating little bit of history. It tells you how there's some very important things in Leicestershire that are lying in people's cupboards and drawers. And they're the sort of things that I think deserve much greater exposure in the mycological press, the biological press, and so on. I think they've sat around for years and nobody really done anything with them. But this is a little fascinating thing, and I'm trying to go and find now whether I can find any more specimens in different herbaria. There are only 3 main lichen herbaria in Britain. That's Edinburgh, the British Museum, and the University Museum of Wales. None of them have got computerized catalogues. I have sifted through the ones that they do have online, and I can't find anything from this, barely from this date, let alone from this expedition. So we may have got a little bit of history. The specimen was quite interesting because that year, Fisher and his friends met a Norwegian explorer called Nanfelt, who'd been stuck in the ice in his boat and got out and spent 3 or 4 months on the ice, living off of whatever he could find, and finally turned up and just by chance found the expedition there. Otherwise he probably would have perished, but after he had met them, he obviously went back to Norway, and he was instrumental in looking after prisoners of war after the First World War, and was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. So that was a lucky meeting. Anyway, there's a lot more about its article in the little file that I've written, but I just wanted to share this with you because it's something that is part of Leicestershire's history now, and it's something we've got that's very important for the history of expeditions, probably tells you a bit about Victorian Britain, and also a little bit about the sort of things that people were collecting years and years ago. And it can't have been really easy collecting in that sort of latitude back in 1896. Anyway, that's all. Finished for now.
Thanks. Do you know what the lichen is, Geoffrey?
Yes, it's Thamnolia vermicularis. It's called the macaroni lichen.
So was it identified at the time? Or?
Yes, and rather nicely, it hasn't changed its name.
I was going to say the taxonomists haven't got at it in the meantime. Very good.
Can I just say, Geoffrey, I think that's absolutely fascinating. I absolutely love that. And well done. I wish I'd been there when you found it.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that, Geoffrey. Is there anyone else who wanted to share anything? No, okay. Well, I think what we'll do then is we'll draw the first half of the meeting to a close, and thank everyone very much for that.